Good morning, everyone. Today I want to talk about writing titles, captions, and blurbs. I divide the topic into 4 parts: title heads in magazines, headlines and titles for the web, blurbs, and captions. Now I will go to the first part. Before I start, I would like to ask you 2 questions. Could you list the titles of all the books you have read? And could you remember the content of all the books you have read? It may sound a little difficult, but you may find that you can recall the titles even if you have forgotten the contents. This shows the importance of titles and the effectiveness of an apt title. A good title helps sell the story. These are some examples of the titles of books. In a magazine, the whole page, including the title, pictures, placement, is designed to stop the readers in their tracks. This combination of elements must make readers say to themselves, "I wonder what this is all about." The editor may select a face that will help depict the mood of the story, nor is the editor required to put the heading over the story. It may be placed in the middle and the bottom or on one side of the page. In magazines, only a few of the rigid rules that apply to newspaper headlines remain in force. Rules of grammar and style are observed, but almost everything else goes. Magazine title writing is free-form in both size and content, and this is some example of subtitle. Now I will talk about the headlines and the titles for the web. There are significant differences between writing heads for print and the websites. Primary among those differences is the need to craft a web headline so the story can easily be found by search engines such as Google and Yahoo. Editor call this an SEO headline, means search engine optimized. There are some reasons of SEO headlines must be different from those that appear in the newspaper or magazine. First, keywords often are missing in print heads, a fatal flaw in online heads, even when entering text and indexed. Without the requisite keywords, the story will rank lower in the list of search results. Second, there often is no contact for the head. In other words, on the web, search engines allow readers to draw straight to the story, sometimes without the surrounding context. Third, print headlines often are too long or too short for the web. As a result, they don't automatically work on the internet. Fourth, print headlines often are written weakly to fit space available in the print edition, which might not correspond to the space available online. Finally, clear heads for which print editors are known often don't work on the web. Website scanners want information and don't want to be traced. Studies show that readers do not like headlines that force them to click on something by tracing, but they do like those that help them evaluate whether they want to read. The third part is about blurbs. Most readers don't read many stories in the newspaper. Instead, They use the headlines, captions, and blurbs as an index to news. So, tell the story as completely as possible is in the main head. Then use second deckers, blurbs, or captions to add as much other important news as possible. Blurbs go by different names at different papers, but the key thing to remember is that whatever they are called, they are information in big type that either provides a summary or a sample of story. And this is three kinds of blurbs. External blurbs are always summary blurbs. They generally come between the headline and the lead of the story. Read-out blurbs are similar in function to second deckers, but they permit more flexibility and generally greater space to say more. Internal blurbs are always simple blurbs. They are placed somewhere within the story itself, usually with rulers above and below them. The last part is about captions. Writing photo captions is an art. Here are some tips to remember. Don't waste the opportunity to get across more information. And feel free to add information from the story to the cutline if you have extra space. If there are multiple captions, put the main cutline information under the dominant photo, the one people will look at first. Write in present tense. It's helpful to avoid dates or dates in cutlines. When more than one person is pictured, a caption usually names them from left. And there are several kinds of captions. Nameline. A nameline is a one-line caption under a mugshot and consists only of the person's name. Underline. An underline is just a one-line caption. And cutline. A cutline is a multi-line caption and is used to provide more information than an underline would allow. Catchline. A catchline is a laphead over the cutline of a stand-alone photo. It's typically 1 to 3 words. And now I will ask two questions. Question 1. Which one of the following is wrong? Yes, the answer is C. And question B. Which one of the following is not a kind of captions? Is C. So thank you very much.
I'm gonna just stick it in here. This one, I presume?
Yes.
Hello everyone. Today I will talk about using photos, and I'm Chen Shanshan. Why is photo important? First, competition for readership, and nowadays there are many channels for obtaining news. And not only should newspaper compete with others in the same industry, but also there are a lot of online media and other emerging media. And what's more, design is as important as content. In general, the size and the quality of newspaper photo increased, and the chart, graphs, and the map proliferated. More importantly, visual appeal. If you cannot attract people's attention, it means losing the market, and it may cause you lose the job. There are two newspapers. The first one is black and white version, and the second one is colorful and more attractive. I think most of you guys will tend to choose the second newspaper to read. And research from the Poynter Institute shows that about 90% of readers enter pages through large photo, artwork, and display type. And second, running a visual element with text makes it 3 times more likely that at least some of the text will be read. And thirdly, headlines are more likely to be read when a photo is nearby. Fourthly, the bigger the photo, the more likely readers are to read the caption. The photo, while these findings relate most directly to newspapers and magazines, it's equally undeniable that visuals makes television what it is, and visuals are extremely important in driving traffic through websites. And the power of visual communication. There are also 2 newspapers. The first one is full of text, and the second one have a lot of interesting pictures and some text. I think people are more likely to choose the second one because it's more interesting. This shows the photo and the information graph markedly increase both comprehension of text and interest in stories. And the second, graphs, photo, and headlines get far more attention from readers than text do. And move to editing decision. The photo editor must determine first, which photo or photos complement the written story or tell a story of their own. Second, whether cropping enhances the image. And third, what size a photo must be to communicate effectively, and whether retouching is necessary. And then I will give you more details about this these 4 parts. First, selection is critical because valuable space will wasted if the picture does nothing more than deep-seat a sense that could be described more efficiently with words. And if the picture adds nothing to the reader's understanding of a story, it should be rejected. Conversely, some pictures capture the emotion or flavor of a situation more vividly than words. In this situation, words and photos provide perfect complements. And cropping is also important. The picture should help the reader immediately grasp the message. And if the picture is too disordered, the reader's eyes scan the picture looking for a place to rest. So we should give the readers the focal point. And the primary job of a photo editor is to help the photographers to take out unnecessary details to strengthen the overall view. There are also two newspapers. The first have three players, and the second newspaper only has 1 person. This is the The editor must decide how many people to include in the picture and how much of each person to include, and what background is essential. Then move to sizing part. The value of the picture, not the amount of space available, should determine the reproduction size of a photo. Photo can be too large, but more often they are damaged by making them too small. The biggest danger is the photo is too small. And thirdly, multi-photograph packages. You can choose the dominant photo. Choose one of the most representative and most attractive one. There also have two newspapers, which tell the same news. And the first newspaper, the photo is at the bottom of the newspaper, and the photo is very small. And the second one, the photo is bigger, and which at the middle of the newspaper. I think most of readers tend to choose the second one because at the first sight you will see the second big photo. Then is electronic enhancement. Some photo can be improved by electronic enhancement, also called retouching. You can use software like Photoshop to tone down or eliminate distractions. But remember, do not change the meaning and the content. Only repair minor imperfections. Like the first picture, you can just adjust the brightness, contrast, and the sharpness. And there are also two bad examples. Anything more than that leads to deception, which sure to destroy a publication's integrity. And the final part is information of photos. Before submitting a picture to the production department, the editor supplies information to get the correct picture in the correct place with the correct caption. And the photo should contain a lot of information, something like the name of picture, the size, and special handling instructions, and the department edition page, date, something like that. And then move to question part. The first question is that, what are the 3 graphical elements for a good newspaper? The editorial equivalent of story. Who can answer the question? A is photos. Yes, thank you. The answer is A, B, and D. Second question. A picture of 15 individuals will be ineffective if it appears a 2-column photo. True or false? The answer is true. More likely such a photo, because is ineffective. So the answer is true. More likely such a photo will require 3 or even 4 columns of space. That's my reference. Thank you for listening.
Okay, actually, this is an appropriate backdrop. One thing I wanted to talk about is standalone photos. In essence, these are standalone photos on this front page. This is a smaller front page. It's not a broadsheet. I believe these are tabloids. And you have a photo here that has no story with it, not on page one. And so the question is, how do you handle that? And is this, by the way, relevant to you guys? It is relevant if you have, for example, you've been kind of arbitrarily given a bunch of stories and photos. You may find that you don't like any of the photos as your lead photo. Go take your own photo. Or you say, well, but what do I take a photo of? Well, that has to be partly your choice if you're going to go take your own photo. But if you can, it doesn't necessarily have to have a story. A standalone photo, and that may be the other question you have. Well, I don't want to go take a picture of just anything, and then I have to write a story about it. No, you don't have to write a story about it. You have to write a caption about it. A newspaper runs lots of pictures without any story, but their caption has to be more complete. So then you're probably going to have at least a 3-sentence caption telling what the photo is all about, and you're also going to have the standalone picture should also have a headline. Now, in this particular case, this one has a headline. This has a very small headline here. So while this is a better position, I'm not sure it's that much bigger. But it may be a little bigger, but it is in a better position in the paper because it's closer. It includes the upper half of the paper. This one actually draws away from the top of the paper. You may never read the top of the paper because you're going down to the bottom of the page. And so that's very bad placement. But on the other hand, they have put a good headline in it. And of course it's saying, see story on, I don't know exactly what it's even saying, I can't read it very well. But it's basically saying read the story on page so-and-so. So there's two cases where you might have a standalone photo. One is if the photo's good and the story's not so good, or maybe it's not so much a bad story, but it's not appropriate for the front page. For example, a sports story. You might love the photo, so you put the photo on the front page to attract readers into your newspaper, but you put the story in the sports page with a different photo. And so it's not that it's a bad story, it's just not appropriate necessarily for the front page. So you use this photo to attract readers, and you put the story someplace else. So that then has to have something like this. It has has to refer you to where you can actually see the story. I'm presuming this is, it's hard to read here, but maybe this has a ref line, or maybe it doesn't have another story. This may be a case where I don't immediately see a ref line there, a reference into another story. I'm presuming they have it in there, but I can't read the text. So that's one situation, as I said, where you have a story, but you put the story someplace else, but you love the photo, so you put the photo on the front page. And the other case, like I said, where you don't have a story at all. This often happens with something like accident photos. They go out to, there's been a car accident, maybe somebody's been killed or something, but they never send a reporter for some reason. And the photographer goes out and gets just enough information so that if the newspaper wants to, follow up or have a reporter do the story, it can. But especially if it's a dedicated photographer, in the sense of that's all they do is photography, they may not be trained in writing stories. And so you don't ask them to gather enough information for a full story. You ask them to gather enough information for the caption. And so that's maybe all, and ultimately, maybe not with a death. Maybe with a death they would do a story, but let's say there's not a death. It's a vicious accident, but everybody walks away. So it's a great picture, but not much of a story because nobody died. And so that's all there really is to say. that, you know, this terrible accident occurred and somehow people walked away. What else do you say? Now, you could follow it up, but in many cases, things like that, a fire, an accident, something you just, whether you don't think it's newsworthy or whether you just don't have time, whatever, you get the picture and you get the caption and you call that good. In either case, if it's on the front page as a standalone, you need a headline. As I showed here, one has a very good headline, a big headline with a ref line into the story. The other one has a very tiny headline. And so in that sense, the one on the left, the page on the left is better in the way it treated its standalone photo. It also basically did a cutout. You notice the same picture, but they cut out along here. And so here they just cut out on the left side of the Korean president. And so they have room there for that headline and ref line. So they took a little more time and care and handling it better. So in this case, it's hard to really say exactly. Well, I mean, I would still lean to the one to the right just because it's higher in the page. I'd say that's better treatment just because actually the one on the left draws your eyes totally away from everything else on the page. You immediately look at that picture. It's big news. It's the biggest photo, and so you have your center of focus on the bottom of the page. You don't want to do that. Now, they do have a big headline about an important local story, obviously, but they don't have any art with it. So, I mean, that's actually, in a sense, more condemnation because here they have this very important story at the top, and they're attracting everybody's attention to the bottom. You don't want to do that. Now, most standalone photos they actually don't treat it like either one of these. They don't usually have this big of a headline. In fact, they don't even usually have a true headline. It was referred to in one of the presentations, but they call it a catch line. And a catch line is more like this one on the right, except maybe bigger type. This is a little bit small. But it might only be 24 point. That looks like a smaller 24 point. It looks more like 18 point or something. And so they might only have a 24 point headline with a standalone photo. And it may not be a true headline in the sense of having a verb, an active verb and so forth. It may just be something to catch your attention. That's why they call it a catch line. You're just catching their attention. That's more culture than it really is defensible. Why wouldn't you have a true headline with a standalone photo? I can't really defend that unless it just simply is not that newsworthy. If it's not all that newsworthy, then maybe you don't need to have a standard headline with it. If you're putting a sports photo on page one, maybe a catch line without a verb and so forth is fine. That catch line would be a little more like a hammerhead, except small. Hammerhead, of course, is supposed to be big, but it's worded. It doesn't have a verb in it, so it's more of a label head with a catch line. So that it may be partly because there's not much story with it, and so I don't know. I can't defend it. So I would tend to write a true headline with my standalone photos, not a catch line. But the book talks about it, and that is actually what it teaches is catch lines, not headlines with photos. So again, I'm not going to even try to defend that because it's kind of like in PR, frequently you have a lot of PR stories that don't have attribution. That's stupid, frankly. It's part of the PR culture. Oh, we don't have to interview anybody. We just make up the story anyway. Everybody knows we just make up the story, so we don't need attribution. Well, that's really, really stupid in PR because you want the editor to value your input, and you want if it happens to get to the readers, you want the readers or whoever, as far as that goes, the editors, to feel like there's some credibility. For there to be credibility, there has to be attribution. They have to know where you got the information. And for it to be usable, even if they assign a reporter to rewrite a press release, they can still pull out some of the attributed quotes and stuff from the press release if it's attributed. If it's not, they can't. So you make their work harder regardless. So this is kind of the same thing. I'm not going to defend a press release that's not written like a news story. My way I teach PR is you write your stories the same as if you're a journalist, and so the editor will respect you, so they can use it exactly the way you have it if they want to, like small newspapers frequently do. They don't bother to rewrite a story because they don't have a big enough staff. The bigger newspapers do rewrite the story, but if you've given them a lot of material for them to start with, they may still use part of your stuff, and they're just more likely to use the story at all. So it's kind of the same thing I say about catch lines. I can't defend it. There's not a good rationale for using catch lines instead of headlines with a standalone photo, unless there really is not much newsworthy in it, and in which case then you're asking yourself, why is it on the front page? Anyway, so it's important for you to know about standalone photos, and you may want to use that. Like I say, if you want to go out and take your own photo, you don't have to write a whole story with it. Go get the good photo and write 3 sentences about it as your standalone caption with its headline or catch line, whatever you think is appropriate. As was discussed in the first presentation, there's some difference between newspapers, magazines, and online treatment of stories, and particularly the headlines or titles, whatever you want to call them. I would tend to still call, again, old-fashioned, I guess, I would still call magazine headline a headline. But it is, newspapers actually occasionally steal good ideas from magazines. For example, a magazine headline is the way it's described and what you saw in the illustration is a magazine headline is much more likely to be what in a newspaper we would call it a hammerhead with a subhead. That's more of the style you're going to have in a magazine, and it's every story. A hammerhead in a newspaper is maybe once in the entire newspaper edition. Maybe twice, but you don't use that device very often in a newspaper. But once or twice in an entire edition of a newspaper would be okay to use a hammerhead. Well, basically in a magazine, almost every title is a hammerhead in essence. You have, as were illustrated, as the different examples showed, they're more the idea is to go ahead and catch their attention. And so you have a big headline typically, and it doesn't necessarily have a verb, and it doesn't necessarily tell the story. You leave them wondering, and then you may have another thing you might have in a magazine is you might have a blurb above the headline. That is very rarely done in a newspaper, putting a blurb above the headline. But in a magazine, it frequently is done. Of course, the newspapers have basically borrowed from magazines' idea of putting a blurb below the headline. Because a blurb, in essence, well, there are various types of blurbs, as was mentioned. But again, one blurb would be basically a summary sentence underneath the headline is a blurb. However, because it's so often used in newspapers now, I would still call it a summary sentence, because that's its purpose. It has a purpose. Instead of a subheadline, you use a summary sentence. By the way, there's been some confusion as I looked at students' work so far. A summary sentence should not be very big. If you want something big, use a subtitle. They're written differently. There's no period in a headline or a subheadline, but a summary sentence has a period. It is a complete sentence. So you're going to use a, and the in a summary sentence. You're going to make it grammatically correct. A subheadline does not use words like a, and the. It uses present tense verbs. You try to make it active. It's bigger, and so forth. So a sub-headline is very different than a summary sentence. The summary sentence, according to the critique sheet, should not be more than 14 point. If you made it 16, I probably won't even notice, or if I do, I won't care. But one of my students yesterday did a summary sentence that was 24 point, and several problems with a 24 point blurb or summary sentence in this case is that it looks like a subtitle, but it's doing some things that a subheadline, or rather subheadline, is doing things that I don't allow with a subheadline. Like it was, there was hyphenation in words, and in other words, words were being cut at the end of sentences because it was so big it didn't fit. The words didn't fit in one line because it was 24 point in a summary sentence, and so it didn't. Just once you get that big, it just doesn't work the same. So you should not have a summary sentence as big as 24 point for sure. Whereas, so in the critique sheet, it says a summary sentence. If you're going to do one, as I said, I kind of caution you not to, probably, because you have to write it separately. It's not your lead. It's not something you pull out of that story. You have to write a summary sentence yourself, and that gives you more chances of having grammatical errors if you don't have real good English, things like that. But it's just harder to write a full sentence than it is to write, to me anyway, write a headline, in this case a subheadline, with maybe 8 words. So I don't really encourage you to do a summary, and I've never used summary sentences in my newspapers. I've always gone with subheadlines instead, and so I guess I'm maybe talking with some prejudice. But I made that prejudice because I thought it was better. Other types, we haven't seen any real good demonstrations, I don't think, in any of the presentations, but you can use with the blurbs, we have talked about pull-out quotes, and I did show you one example that I created, but early on, and I didn't create one in my latest demonstration. Frequently, it's nice to put it into a shadow box or something like that, where it becomes even stronger graphically to draw people's attention. But the point of a pull-out quote is where it says, the speaker said that it could be a part of the content, or it could be a summary. Most frequently, I think in newspapers, it's going to be part of the content, but it could be a pull-out quote, or it could be kind of a summary sentence, so it's still kind of a summary, or maybe an indirect quote, I guess. So it's not really a summary, it's an indirect quote. The indirect quotes, though, are kind of hard to use without people thinking it's a direct quote. If you're putting it, depending how you treat it. If you put it in italics or something, you put a name line under it showing who said this, and it's an indirect quote, it can be problematic. So my preference, if I'm going to use a blurb for graphic purposes, is to make it a pull-out quote. A pull-out quote does not mean you actually pull it out of the story, that is, cut it out of the story. You leave it in the story where it was at, but you copy it and you put it into your as a blurb. You blow it up to where it's 16 or 16 point or something, where it stands out. You maybe make it bold, italics, so it stands out. And again, there are other ways to do it, but my preference is to do a shadow box and make it even more powerful graphically. And I will probably try. I think I'm going to demonstrate that on Monday. Typically, though, the name that goes with it, you have like a dash, and then you have the name, and it's usually flush right. Name and maybe their position, maybe something about them. Typically, it's quite short, but it's also quite a bit smaller than the pull-out quote. So the pull-out quote I mentioned might be 16 point, might even be 18 point, but more likely something around 16 point, maybe 14 point. And then the the attribution under it is like 10 point. So the attribution is typically a lot smaller because you're emphasizing what they said, kind of like what I say with with leads. You emphasize what they said and you don't emphasize who said it. It's there so you can read it, but it's at the bottom below the pull-out quote in smaller type, maybe not bold, maybe it's plain faced, not in italics, not in so your pull-out quote is bold, big, italics, and then underneath it, dash the name of the person, maybe their title, their working title, if not their formal title. So all of that, that's a good piece of art if you do it right. If you do it badly, it can be kind of distracting. So I was one of the things that I showed one of the students last night. She had a pull-out quote, and she put a box around it that was in color, and it was in very stark contrast to everything else on the page, and it just didn't look right. And I can't even say exactly why it doesn't look right. I'm not real good with colors, and so actually I admitted to her that the problem she was having with using these primary colors of cyan, magenta, these are colors that you put together to make full color in a newspaper. Use black, magenta, cyan, and yellow. And that makes your full color when you mix them together in different varieties and different amounts. And so for some reason, those colors don't look particularly good by themselves. They kind of jump out, but they're not appealing. The other thing that even if you use a different color, what I found is that if you're going to put a color tint over a pull-out quote or something, which can be very effective, is I try to find a color that is in a photo on the same page, that it's on the page already. And so, for example, if I were to put a pull-out quote in on this page, we do have some stark red, white, and blue sort of stuff, a lot of red on the North Korean flag. That is a little bit, red's not a great color for that. Maybe the blue would be a better color. But if somewhere else, or even this box, you have a tinted, just a gray box here. If for example, you were to make it a see-through blue, and so the type could be seen more or less transparent blue, still that tone but transparent, that might look okay here because you already have blue down here. You might want to put if you change the color of your nameplate or what I call a flag, actually what I call it, but some people call it nameplate. You might for the day make it dark blue. So you have a dark blue headline, you have a transparent blue here instead of a gray, and then you have your flag down there. You sort of kind of make it the color of the day. But this color is definitely not a primary color. It looks a little better, but it doesn't match anything else on the page. So I think it looks better if, and again, these colors are kind of abnormally stark. So maybe it doesn't work in this particular example. But otherwise, if I am looking, actually this does not exactly match a yellowish gold sort of color in this part. And you see this is kind of a tan, and this down here is kind of a tan. Not that the news staff would be in charge of this ad, but it does kind of help it go together to have some tones in this photo that are also in this ad. And so people who did, in this case it was in the natural background, but you by identifying colors that are already existed on the page, then it's less likely to jump out and hit you over the head in a bad way, in a way that says, oh, that's just too strong, it looks stupid, and I don't know how else to explain it. So you have to be really careful with selecting colors so they don't look stupid. I don't know how, like I say, color combinations are not my strength by any means. But that's one thing I found to overcome it, is when I start choosing colors for color boxes, things like that, I start looking at colors that already exist in photos. and make that decision. I found it looks a lot better than when I was using primary colors sometimes, stuff like that, like the student did last night. I had to steer her away from that because it did not look right. It looked, it was, I don't know, it looked terrible. That's all I can say. Okay, let me cover one other thing here real quick about our deadlines and stuff. I'm going to go there, and I'm going to have to change the image here. And then I'm going to give you, even though most of you are ignoring me anyway, give you some time to work on your project, and I will be here. If somebody wants me to give them a very quick review of what I'm seeing, I can do that. Okay, so maybe just pull this down a little bit if it will let me. I went over this a little in class, but a lot of people missed our lecture on Monday. So to point out, we now have lab times here and in 105 just across the hallway here. So on Mondays, I think at least we'll probably keep this schedule the rest of the semester. We might adapt it from time to time with, for example, what I have in green here is only one day only. But what's here in blue is this room, the Apple lab, 104. What's in yellow here is the Windows lab in 105 across the hall. And so on Mondays, you have 2 hours in the morning, from 11 to 1 actually, here, available to you. And you have in the afternoon, 2 to 4, the 105. On Tuesdays, those hours flip. So in the morning, from 11 to 1, in other words, right, I was going to say after this class, today's Wednesday. So anyway, after those that have tutorial on Tuesday, they could go over to the Windows lab if they want to use a Windows computer with a larger monitor. And in the afternoon, FISA back here again. On Wednesday, today, we couldn't find any Windows time, so after this class, FISA will be available here and again in the afternoon. But then, and Thursday, we leave this lab, well, first off, it's totally, the Windows lab is covered all day by other people. And this lab, we leave open for Luis's classes. So we don't have any time scheduled on Thursday, but on Friday, we have all morning scheduled in the Windows lab across the hall, 105. So during this week, while you're trying to get this assignment done, if you need a Windows computer to do it, you missed the first opportunities on Monday and Tuesday, but on Friday you have 4 hours to, if you get up at 8 in the morning, you can use the Windows lab to do your work. Now on next Monday, first off, two things. I keep saying that the deadline is midnight, and I keep lying about it because I actually set the deadline. If you actually go to Moodle and click on the submission portal where you submit this assignment. Two things, by the way, you're supposed to submit it in PDF and in the Quark file itself. And you actually have until 9 o'clock Tuesday morning. So if somebody's inclined to work all night, they can work all night on that project to finish it up, but you won't have access to labs. Which brings me to another point, is that whenever FISA is here, you can get a copy of Quark if you don't already have it on your laptop. Laptops are not ideal for designing newspapers, but that's what I've been demonstrating on. And about half of the students have Quark now on your laptops, but the other half do not. I would certainly, if I were you, I certainly strongly advise that you get Quark on your laptop for two reasons. One is so that you can work on it after 8 o'clock next Monday. In case you need some more time, you can do it even if you did it early, did most of the work earlier in the Windows lab. You can now open it up on your laptop and finish it if you needed to after 8 o'clock on Monday, because you have all night if you choose to use it. But also, frankly, if you don't know when you're going to need desktop publishing, but this is a vital skill in communications, because it's not just about newspapers. If you don't want to work at a newspaper or a magazine or a press or a PR agency where you might use it, this is also used on websites. First off is PDFs. A lot of people use PDFs on their websites, but it's also can be used, or actually you can convert it to a JPEG. I have a website up right now for a conference, well, the one I wrote about that I sent out yesterday for those that need another story. And so being kind of lazy or busy, however you want to look at it, I created this whole website as one big JPEG, basically, because I already had it developed for a flyer. So I basically converted the whole flyer that I created in Quark into a big JPEG and plumped it onto a website. Because I didn't have time to do it in HTML. And so, where did I put it? And so my website for a conference that I'm sponsoring next month is this basically, it was done in Quark, and I converted the flyer into a JPEG and plunked it into my website. So basically, this whole website is basically a JPEG, except the bottom. I linked it to a database where they could sign in and register for the free conference. So I didn't have to hardly do anything for this. Quark does have a way of exporting as an HTML5 website, and I haven't experimented with that yet. But that's really important because HTML5 is a key innovation in that it is created so that you can make it look good on a desktop computer, but it will convert also to a mobile device. And I'm not exactly sure how Quark does it in this case, but they do it. One of their functions is to export all the elements in some way that you can then create a HTML5 website, and it will adjust itself for mobile users. So I'm going to have to experiment with that more because it's not the typical traditional use of desktop publishing. But I believe InDesign also is developing HTML capability with its desktop publishing as well. So Quark, they're finding that in order to make themselves relevant for the future, this is something they feel like they have to do. So the desktop publishing has more functions than just producing a newspaper. It can do flyers expertly. It can do online documents in PDF format. It can do like this. I converted this Quark into a JPEG flyer, and I plunked it onto website. I mean, you have lots of options with it, and you don't know when you're going to need those options. I learned desktop publishing as a newspaper person, but it was one of the most important skills I had in PR marketing. I didn't anticipate going into PR marketing. I never planned to. I didn't train to. I didn't want to go into PR marketing until I had motivation to, which happened to be that my newspaper job kept me up all night, and I hardly ever saw my kids, who were now teenagers. So when I got a job, had an opportunity to go to a daytime job and see my kids at night, I jumped at it. So for most of 10 years, I was in PR marketing instead of journalism. But still, desktop publishing was my most important technical skill in that job. So you don't know when you're going to use it. So if you have it on your computer, you can continue to use it for a variety of purposes and get used to it, get comfortable with it. So when you graduate, you will, as you know, when you leave campus, you can't use it because it's tied to our server here. But you will still walk away with greater skills, and you'll be able to go into a job that you don't anticipate wanting or having in the future. Okay, so I think I'll quit there. And oh, by the way, I guess I was going to say, also going back to the timeline, whenever I'm here, like on next Monday night, I will also open up this lab if somebody wants to come use this lab. Since it's right across the hall, I can kind of go back and forth, make sure nobody's stealing a computer. Although I may ask somebody who's in here to take charge when I'm, you might say, legally more disposed to be in the Windows lab if there are people there, because that's where the administration thinks I should be at that time. That's where I promised to be, is in 105. So I might spend a little less time in 104, and so I'll appoint somebody who's here if somebody comes and wants to use it. They are in charge. If the computer goes missing, they're on my blacklist. So, so both labs can be opened up when it says green there, when it has the green. And I think that probably FISA also, when she's in charge of 105, where in these green or the yellow boxes, that she could probably be talked into opening this room also, if you wanted to use the Apple lab. I think I mentioned the other day, let me also, because some people weren't there, make note that the administration is requiring us to only do the final exam in Windows. So those of you who are Apple users, you also need to know how to do it in Windows, because that's what the administration says. We have to be consistent. I disagree with that, but I can't override the administration. I made my argument that as long as we didn't have more than 30 students wanting to use Apple, that we allow at least 30 students to come in here. If we suddenly had 40, then maybe we couldn't do that, because how would we choose the 30 out of the 40? But as long as we had no more than 30, I thought we should allow this to be one of our venues for our final exam, and Academic Affairs said no, they wouldn't let me. So the final decision is we will only be doing it on Windows. We'll be down on the first floor. There's a lab, I think 10 and 11 labs, and then the 105 up here will all be scheduled. I don't know that we need all of those, but anyway, they're scheduled for our final exam here in this building. So, any questions, anything? If not, I'll stop disturbing your work. And if anybody wants to show me their work to date, I will give you some quick feedback. And I will stay here as long as you need me to stay here to continue giving feedback to anybody who wants some feedback. So, okay. If there's any of you who are